it's kind of like oceanic pornography in a way. It's so I don't know. It's just breathtaking.
Hey guys, I'm David.
And I'm Alain, and welcome to our podcast, I Finally Watched, where we talk about movies that at least one of us hasn't seen before.
We discuss our thoughts on the film and determine, was it worth the wait?
Does it still hold up? And would we watch it again?
And today I finally watched The Master.
So, The Master is about this kind of rough scoundrel character, I would say, Freddie Quell, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who is coming back from the Navy in, 1950s?
I think he meets Philip Seymour Hoffman around the 50s. I mean, obviously he fought in World War II, which ended in like 45.
Yeah.
So then,
So he's been kind of like a drifter for like 3 to 5 years at that point, and he kind of wanders on the Master ship. The Master, played by, like you said, Philip Seymour Hoffman. He stumbles upon his ship as a stowaway, and is from there just kind of taken care of by the Master, and falls into his cult-like religion.
yeah, I think that's a good synopsis.
See, in my opinion, from the acting to the cinematography to the overall writing, it's one of the best movies of the I don't know the last 20 years. I don't know if you feel that way. Probably not, but
I can hear your bated breath. So when I first saw it, I was really blown away by, as you said, the cinematography and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Because I hadn't seen this and I haven't really seen like a new Philip Seymour Hoffman performance in years, because he passed away sadly. Getting to see something new from him and something that he was just so amazing in. I texted one of my friends afterwards and I was like, we talk about movies all the time. I was like, bold statement. I think he might be might be the best actor of the last 20 years.
oh, for sure,
Well,
for
I was saying the
sure.
best. Obviously you have Daniel Day-Lewis and DiCaprio that I consider high up there. And, he mentioned a few too. You could say Tom Hanks.
Well,
But
I would even say, for my category of best actors, in the last 20, 30 years, two of them are in this movie: Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix.
yeah, I can definitely see that. But just the way, a lot of people, when they'll talk about movies and they'll talk about performances and how you have two people that kind of go head to head in a movie and one of them blows the other off the screen. And I always think that's, that's the way it's written, right? I mean, the dialogue and the direction, that kind of tells you who's going to blow someone off the screen. But,
Mm-hmm.
in this movie, they're, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix are kind of equal sides of like the opposite, equal opposites. But I mean, every scene that Philip Seymour Hoffman is in is just dominant. He's the center, and just the way he delivers his lines and the way he, enunciates certain words, like he is almost like a Southern preacher, because he's leading this cult. Just that was something in the first watch I was blown away by. Now I wouldn't have, after that first watch, agreed with you. I did watch it again a few days later and had a much better appreciation for the movie. You just pick up so much more. There's the writing is so subtle with things. You pick up the major themes the first time, but just these subtle little details throughout, I think, add so much to it. And it's one that is very rewarding with repeated viewings.
Like I said, it's one of my favorite movies. It emotionally, like personal emotionally, it's not that high up on my list. I just think it's a very well done movie. Like you were saying, because when I first talked to you, after right after you watched the movie, you didn't seem that impressed. And now you're saying that you have a kind of watching it again.
Are you trying
You
to get my
have,
story? Are you trying to get my story straight?
well, no, I mean, I guess I'm saying like you have a newfound appreciation, is what you're saying.
I think it's the type of movie that you need to kind of think on. You need to marinate on,
Well, it's
and
definitely a
then
type of movie. It's definitely a type of movie I feel like you should watch alone.
yeah, I would agree with that. I watched the first time with my wife, and she was not a fan of the movie at all. And so when you're watching with someone else who's not a fan of something, you make comments here and there. I mean, because we can get into it, but the opening of this movie is so odd,
Hmm.
and Joaquin Phoenix's character is so odd throughout the movie, um, that it's sort of grating. And so if you're watching with someone who's not really into watching it or doesn't want to in the first place, it can obviously have an effect. But at the same time, I think it's also you when you think more about the movie and then a second viewing, I think is this is one of those movies where I think watching it again is almost necessary.
Right. I mean, oh man, I just for the cinematography, I know we keep coming back to the cinematography, but it is really a beautiful movie. And the ocean shots, the water shots, it's kind of like oceanic pornography in a way. It's so I don't know. It's just breathtaking, um, and just everything about the lighting and the angles is wonderful.
And also something I noticed about it is it's relies so heavily on the score, which is something I didn't really notice the first time. But this movie, it's very dialogue heavy, but the dialogue doesn't, in a lot of movies, the dialogue is used to explain to the audience what's happening. But in this movie, you're basically dropped in as a fly on the wall, listening to something, and no one in the movie is there to try and help you figure out what's going on. And so, Philip Seymour Hoffman uh, talks so vaguely throughout the movie, and it's really hard to follow. You can follow the story, but it's such a simple story. But the director uses the music to kind of to guide you along with the story in a really interesting way, and it's also like a very beautiful score too. And so I really like that aspect of it, and I appreciated it a lot more the second time I was watching it.
When I watch a movie, I'm so musically deficient in listening to scores and music cues. I'm just really bad at it. But the first time I saw this movie, and then when I watched this film again, that's it was one of the most like glaring things that I noticed, especially the music in the beginning, because it's like plucking of the strings, very like ding ding, and
Right.
it 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 was the dialogue. Like I would say in the first 20-25 minutes, there's very little dialogue, and I would say the music was the dialogue. Like you said, it carried you from scene to scene, and I appreciated that a lot.
Well, and the major point where I noticed it too is this movie, I don't think has, to me, only had one funny part in the entire movie. It's a very serious movie, and that was they're in when they make it to New York City and they're at a person's home who is a believer in what they call the cause, which is the cult that they're in. Someone starts to question Philip Seymour Hoffman about the cult,
Right.
and Freddie then throws something at him, and Philip Seymour Hoffman is like yelling at him, and the whole group of people that are there are like kind of very off put by this. And I think it's actually eventually the lady that owns the house kind of leaves the cult because of this. But right after this scene, it's like a hard cut, and they're all in the elevator standing there, all just looking kind of crestfallen, and the music playing in the background like actually made me laugh. And I think it's the only scene that is, I think, purposely supposed to be funny. And the rest of it, I think, is very serious. I don't know if you found anything else funny in the movie.
During the scene where the guy interrupts him and like you say, questions the religion, and Philip Seymour Hoffman is like keeping a cool head, but the guy keeps pushing him, and then he calls him like a really nasty word, and he just kind of like turns all red and just says,
This is pig effort.
and I thought that was funny, like his because he tries to keep like a cool-headed leadership, and then he just blows up and calls him a pig F, and I was like, okay, that's pretty good.
Well, and actually, I forgot too. Before that, the guy who questions the cause keeps saying "excuse me," and like everyone kind of notices, but they don't pay attention to him. And then he waits like 30 full seconds and says, "excuse me," and just like everyone looks at him, but then they don't pay attention, and he just keeps doing it to interrupt. I actually thought that was pretty funny too. But the elevator scene, I think the only reason I found it funny, yeah, obviously the contrast, but the hard cut, but then the music, which is kind of the point I was getting to, is the way he uses music to get his point across in a movie that doesn't have a lot of dialogue.
Well, with the lack of dialogue, you said earlier that you as the audience just end up in the moment of the movie. Sometimes it cuts to a scene with a certain passage of time that has expired from one scene to the next, and you just end up there as the audience member without really any like cause or explanation, and you have to figure it out. And for me, I vastly enjoy a movie much less when they walk you through it, when they explain every little detail. I hate flashbacks of something at the end of a movie that happened at the beginning of a movie, because I'm like, it only happened an hour and a half ago. I of course remember it, so those kind of things personally bother me about a movie. So I really do appreciate a movie that doesn't think I'm stupid and that will let me figure it out along the way.
I agree. And one example of that too is, so after Freddie meets the master, Philip Seymour Hoffman, they do what's called informal processing. It's kind of the basis of the religion, and Philip Seymour Hoffman asks a bunch. I'm just going to call him the master. The master asks Freddie a bunch of questions and sort of takes him back to when I first watched it. My wife was questioning. We were kind of arguing: is that a memory, or is it almost like a dream of like what he wanted to happen? And he takes him back to this girl that Freddie had met, and it's kind of a question, dream or memory. And later on, late in the movie, Philip Seymour Hoffman kind of reveals that their whole process used to be, it was memories. And I think Peggy talks about that a little bit too. And so that second viewing, I was able to pick that up because it kind of happens afterwards. Things are explained to you out of sequence, and you kind of have to put the puzzle together to know the answer.
Yeah, it does. It does make you think. The scene that you're talking about with the informal processing, because their religion cult thing works on kind of a pseudo hypnotism process, where if you've lived multiple lives through, I guess, reincarnation, it doesn't exactly explain it in detail, but if you're a 30-year-old man in this life, but you might have been a 50-year-old woman in the life before, he tries to get you into that tranquil mode in your mind to try to reveal what exactly you were before by asking you a series of questions. And when he does this for the first time to Joaquin Phoenix, there's a lot of repetitiveness, and he answers, his name, Freddie Quill. Was he, like, one of the questions is, did he have sex with one of his family members? And when he first asked, he said no. And then after a lot of repetitive, you know, uh, repetitive motion and asking the question multiple times, he finally reveals that he has. And that happens like quite a bit through the movie. But I think it doesn't seem like it on the surface, but it feels really telling to the character once you see it a couple times.
Yeah, and I think that, along with kind of the whole beginning of the movie, sort of sets the stage for who Freddy is. Because he in that informal processing, you kind of come to the conclusion that he's, an unreliable. You could say narrator. He's not necessarily a narrator because you're seeing it from like a third person view the whole movie, but he lies a lot. And so he's just very untrustworthy. There's the scene in the beginning where he's accused of poisoning someone and he denies it, and you can't really trust him. And so that plays a great deal into his character of who he is. He's, from my point of view, he's almost like just like an id. He's like the embodiment of like your base needs and desires. Like the only things he wants are food,
Mm-hmm.
sex, and
And
booze.
shelter.
Well, it's shelter, obviously, but I think that's fourth behind the booze and the sex and the food for him.
Well, so what this movie does, because we've watched a lot of films that are heavily based in plot, and I don't feel like this movie is based in plot at all.
I think the plot's almost inconsequential to the movie.
Exactly. It completely focuses on who these characters are, especially Joaquin Phoenix's Freddie Quell, and what changes he goes through from the beginning to the end of the movie. Like you said, he had very basic instincts, and the master has called him a dirty, filthy animal, because I feel like the master always looked at himself as the example of perfection, very sophisticated, very high class, and everyone who is not at his level are animals. And I think there was no better example of a human animal than Freddie Quell.
Which is why, at least in my opinion, I wonder if you agree that he liked having Freddy around, because it was this part of him that he was sort of suppressing, that not allowing. And when Freddy was around, he had Freddy make him these alcoholic drinks that had like paint thinner in them. And I think that is why he kept Freddy around, was to hone into that animal instinct that he didn't want to take part in himself.
Well, I think it was even more than that. I think it was the fact that the master, even though he had this like veil of sophistication and betterness, I guess betterness than everyone else, he still had a lot of vices. He still had a lot to deal with personally. Freddie was a drunk, but he was also a drunk. Uh, to a certain degree, he was a flirtatious kind of guy, especially his wife, played by Amy Adams, got onto him for being so flirtatious to
Yeah,
other women.
basically, you can sleep with anyone as long as I don't find out about it. So just, be better at it.
Right, right. Be better at hiding it. And I think he kept Freddie around because even though no matter how bad his sins, I guess, sins got, Freddie's was also always worse. And that probably made him feel better.
Yeah, I can see that. But at the same time, I think Peggy, in that same scene where she's telling him about the cheating, is also telling him that Freddie is a bad influence on him. Like, he's making that booze for you. And then after telling him that, she goes to Freddie and it's like, Freddie, you can't drink anymore if you're going to stay around here. You need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is in my opinion, it was he liked that influence on him because it was a thing he didn't want to dabble in.
So you would say Freddie was the main character,
Yes.
and basically the master helped him get to a certain change in his life. I guess this is where we would get into a bit of spoiler territory here.
Although
The
I don't know if anything matters for spoilers in this.
Well, what's so interesting is that plot wise, it doesn't. Like, I can tell you, oh, they ended up in England at the end of the movie, and it doesn't really matter. But I feel like the only thing spoiler wise would be it, how the characters have changed to at the end of the movie.
Right. And I think you probably think Freddy's changed a lot more than I do.
Yeah, I do. But what's more interesting, and as I like really thought about it, is the change not from Freddy's perspective, but the change that the master went through from the beginning to the end of the film, I felt was almost equal to Freddy's change.
Yeah, because when we first meet Freddy, and I thought the opening of the film was kind of like a microcosm for his character and for how people interacted with him. There's they're building a lady on the beach out of sand, and Freddy hops on top of her and pretends to have sex with her, and all the other sailors are laughing. And then it goes on for way too long, and they're all super uncomfortable. And then they just like kind of start looking away, and then Freddy finishes up, and it's like everyone who interacts with him in his life up to that point, and before he meets the master and kind of goes through a change, um, they all meet him. They like him, and then they get to know him more. Like the woman in the department store that he worked with, she was interested in him, and then she got to know him more, and seemed even scared by him because he kind of was an insane person.
Well, he was incredibly unstable, and you're exactly right. Anyone who met him, even if they started liking him a little bit, eventually ran away from him. Um, what was interesting to me is the master never ran away from him. It got to a point in the movie where he ran away from the master, and I thought that was a pivotal change in his development.
And you know what I found interesting, to go back a little bit to the beginning, is everyone ran away from him except for Doris. His This was like a 16-year-old girl that wrote to him while he was in the war, and he came back to see her and told the master that he was in love with her. And it's almost as if he was self-aware enough to know, I really love this person, but if I stay around her, like, I'm going to drive her off, and before that can happen, it's like the only real human connection he kind of had, and he didn't want to lose it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, you would say that because he was so unstable, insane, PTSD kind of person because of the war, and he's just kind of a weird. I feel like he was weird before the war too, right? Like he's just kind of a
I mean,
weird
I
guy.
don't know.
He couldn't go see Doris because, like you said, he felt like he would put her in a situation, and he truly loved her, and he didn't want to put her in that situation. But when he, quote unquote, maybe felt like he got better, maybe he was cured of his irrational methods, he ran away from the master, and the first thing we see him do is go immediately to try to get Doris back, where we learned it's been like what, 8 years, and she's off married with like 2 kids.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
his change just happened too late. He waited too long to get better. I thought that was the true character development, is that he is the one abandoning someone else and not someone else abandoning him for the first time in his life. um but not in a way that he, that because he probably, when he was with the master, he was well taken care of. He was fed. He had a roof over his head, and kind of a fed alcohol. He made the alcoholic drinks, and it was just kind of like the ingredients were just given to him to do. So it was kind of like this perfect life, and he had a chance to come back into it at the end, and he rejects it for not the purpose of not wanting to be committed. At least this is how I took it, that he didn't have a problem being committed to the cause, but almost like he outgrew the cause.
Yeah, it had done what he needed to, and he was able to leave, I don't think a normal life, but he was able to lead a semi-normal life where, he picks up a woman at the end of the movie, and which is kind of the farthest we've seen him go, really, with a woman. And he's a lot more normal, right? And I actually think upon rewatch too, so the first thing Philip Seymour Hoffman really says is Joaquin Phoenix asks, "Is this your ship?" And he says, "I'm its commander, yes." So the very first question he answers is just evasive. He gets asked questions and he's evasive. The guy asks him about the cause, and he starts saying, "Do you believe there's pyramids in Egypt?" And he's like, "You've never been, but great scholars tell us they are." Basically, like, don't ask me for receipts, just believe me, because I'm great and I'm telling you that we can cure leukemia and stop nuclear war with my religion I've created.
He's a BSer, but he's a really good BSer.
Amazing BSer.
Yeah, I mean, to have that many people follow you purely on faith.
I think what's also revealed throughout the movie is how, and it's little tidbits here and there about how these animal instincts kind of take over the master in a way that his wife Peggy always sort of has to bring him back. There's that scene in the bathroom
Mm-hmm.
where she tells him to stop cheating on him, and you're going to
Yep,
ruin the cause.
that's definitely all that happens in that bathroom.
No need to talk about anything else in there at all. And another interesting scene is where she, after that guy questions the cause, she says, "We need to go on the attack." And then, quite literally, Freddie says, "All right, let's go on the attack," and goes and, I mean, it's not clear if he just beats the crap out of the guy or if he kills him. I would imagine just beating him up. But then at the end, when Freddie comes to England and meets them, and they're talking, and Peggy's just like, you're either here, you can't just be here for a moment. This is 1,000,000,000 years or nothing. You have to be all committed to this.
Yeah.
And then she's just looks over at the master and says, he's not committed to this. This is a waste of time, and just walks out. She, in a lot of ways, she's the one kind of in control. She's, for a bad pun, I guess, she's kind of the true master, steering the ship and making sure that Philip Seymour Hoffman doesn't go off course. Because even in the end, he tells Freddie, "If you ever leave again, I don't want to see you again." And then he looks at him, he's like, "Or you could stay," with almost these puppy dog eyes, like, "Please stay. But just, if you leave me, don't come back."
And he doesn't. He says, "Well, then I'll see you in another life." So yeah, I think we really see how far he's gone from, the guy he was in the beginning. The movie as a whole, I know we've said it was very beautiful and uh, catching to the mind and to the eye. Would you watch this movie again?
I think at some point I may. This movie has led me to kind of watch we never mentioned Paul Thomas Anderson, the director of this movie, who
Right.
made such a beautiful film. I realized that this and There Will Be Blood are the only movies of his I've seen. He's done 8 in total that I think would be his kind of major works. And so I think, one, I want to kind of go through his movies and watch them. But 2, also, I kind of want to go through and watch a lot more Philip Seymour Hoffman performances, because I kind of just miss someone that dynamic. that just watching him act is a treat. So I probably will at some point. So this has been I Finally Watched The Master. Thanks for joining us. See you guys next time.
Bye.